So, Mr. Mathur, once again, welcome. Sanjana, thank you so much for a wonderful introduction. So, Mr. Mathur, I was actually looking at your profile, and I was wondering this, like 4 summits, triathlon, marathons, writing books, being at the leading position in HR in Deutsche Bank, and then subsequently with Morgan Stanley, and then now leading Morgan Stanley in India. I mean, any one of those tracks, if people could achieve the level of success that you have, then they would be patting their back. And then here we have you, so successful in each of those areas. So I think in the interest of what I have seen, I've received several questions from today's participants. What I would like to do is to take you back from perhaps where all it started. So as you and I were chatting earlier, if you could go back to 10th and 12th and your undergrad, that's at the Stephens, what prepared you, what inspired you, influenced you to the path such as management education and then interest that you subsequently honed? So if you could take us back there and then begin from there, that would be great.
When you say go back to your school days, I will confess that it's many, many years ago. Much as I may not look that old, but it is many, many years ago. I come from a services family. My father was in the army. He was a doctor in the army. And so a lot of what I do and harbor as passions actually come as a little bit of an inheritance from the family. The exposure, I think, at that stage in school was with the outdoors, was with wanting and trying new things, was about moving to new places and sort of making new friends every 3 years. And so I guess the general sort of construct of my behavior patterns have been pretty much influenced by that. I graduated, I finished school from the Army Public School, Delhi. And at that point of time, pretty much unlike now, the only 3 career options that you had was to either become an engineer, a doctor, or a failure. Didn't make the engineer or the doctor grade. And so I was sort of left wondering at the end of grade 12 as to what I wanted to do. Fortunately, I had decent marks in 12th, and I managed to get myself a seat at St. Stephen's, Delhi. And that's where I graduated from. I think because of the sort of environment that we grew in, which was in the forces, my exposure to anything outside the army was very limited, and so I sort of took it up to figure out and find out what there is that existed outside of that world. And I think it took quite a bit of time and a fair bit of help from a lot of people to be able to sort of figure out what I wanted to do. But I went into Stephens basically knowing nothing about anything outside of what the army life was.
So I think, I mean, this is wonderful, right? On the one hand, the army actually equipped you with a lot of those things that would eventually come handy when you have your passions for outdoor activities, whether it's mountaineering or whether it's triathlon and then marathon and what have you. And then on the other side, there was a price to pay for that exposure, so to say, because you didn't have the exposure to the outside world as we call it, like the civil society or the non-army kind of exposure. During Stephens, how did you develop the other interest areas or capability that allowed you to function well in the non-army kind of context? And then what led you to then think of the management profession or education subsequently?
So the exposure, I guess, at Stephens was to a variety of individuals that came from a varied set of backgrounds. And I think as I spent my 3 years over there, I got to know about what life was outside of the environment that I'd been used to. We didn't have Google at our fingertips, so whatever we could find out at that point of time was from either reading up stuff or asking people. And so, as I spoke to some of my seniors, I figured that an MBA, quote unquote, was a great option if you wanted to get yourself a job. And at that point of time, the only primary sort of driver for everything was getting yourself a job. So I followed everyone else, and I said, "Hey, let me give it a shot for an MBA." I was fortunate enough to get into symbiosis, and that's how the management journey started. But when I joined an MBA school, again, I had never seen the inside of an organization, and I knew very very few people who were actually worked in an organization. All my father's friends were, army personnel. All my network was largely army personnel. So I went into an MBA school pretty much blind on what the future would hold, except for knowing the fact that it would land me a job 2 years after I was done with the management education. Uh, during my 2 years at Symbiosis, I think my exposure was phenomenal in terms of the outside world, and that's where I really learned what life would be about. I still wasn't completely sure on what I wanted to do, but sort of human resources came easily to me, and at that time it was known as personnel management. But it came easy to me, and therefore I veered towards a career in human resources or personal management, as it was called then. And like they say, the rest just followed suit.
Oh, wonderful. So I think, thank you so much for sharing this, because uh, it seems like that although this was not very clear after 12th, but the Stephens and then what happened in symbiosis actually shaped your future path, so to say. It kind of gave the foundation. So one thing, I have few people in Army as well. I actually had an opportunity to get through the Air Force, and I didn't join, maybe my loss. Uh, One thing that I know about the Army is that it actually prepares you very well for the management skills, because everything in management actually started from Army and then kind of came into the way we see the civil organizations or the non-Army organization. Uh, and the human resource is the vital component of what happens in Army, other than logistics. Did anything from what you saw in Army influenced you more towards human resources?
I would say it was an impact on my choice of going for human resources. I think I sort of veered towards the ability to uh, work well with people. I think what the army life prepared me for was the ability to be flexible and adaptable. We used to change cities every 2.5 3 years. Every time you moved to a new city, you had to get out of your house and go and make friends. You had to go out and sort of join the gang of guys who was playing soccer or cricket or whatever else. And I think you had to have the initiative yourself to be able to go in there and fit in. So I think that's what that experience or exposure provided to me. Once you are sort of comfortable outside your skin on aspects where you can go out and reach people and start a conversation or have a conversation, I think that is fundamental to whatever you do in management life.
Oh, wonderful. So I think, would it be fair to actually say then that if you look at the first part, which is like the foundation year, the ability to kind of reach out to people, adapt to the situation, understand where they are coming from, and then kind of fit in, make that group better with your presence, and then the discipline. I think these are the two components that kind of stand out for me. Would it be fair that these were the two things that kind of gave you the foundation?
Absolutely. Look, I didn't know at that time that these were skills that were in the making. I was just doing what I was expected to do and
Mm.
following what I was expected to follow. But I think when I look back to 30 years of corporate life, I think those were things that probably shaped how I was and who I was and what I did and how I did things.
Okay. So thank you so much for actually walking us through the early foundation years, and then how things that we don't realize at that point in time, but then after we look back and then kind of look at the dots, they all connect.
Correct.
That's an amazing benefit of looking back at this point in time, and hopefully some of our audience who are actually at different stages of life, when they are looking and kind of figuring things out, I think the first principles, as I always think, work out well. Uh, so, so if you look at your first few years as the professional, as you stepped into the corporate life, and you started figuring things out in corporate, and then kind of came to that point where you could actually see that you're moving ahead, there's a fast track ahead of you. So how did all happen? What traits, what capabilities, what skills that actually helped you during that period of time as you built your career in the initial stages?
So I think my initial few years were rough. I think when I sort of graduated out of an MBA school, I like a lot of new management graduates believed that I knew everything and I could change the world. Unfortunately, when you sort of hit the ground running and you realize that not everything that was taught to you sort of translates into the work environment, and that you don't know everything, it's a little bit of a rude shock. It's a it's it's a rude awakening, actually, more than a shock. It sort of gets you to realize where you are in the hierarchy of things. And honestly, when you start at a corporate, you really start at the bottom of the pyramid. So I think the first year was a little bit of a shocker. The about 2 years after I started to work, I said to myself, I said, look, I don't want to live my life like this. I don't want to be working for someone else and someone telling me what to do. So I took the brave and, in hindsight, perhaps a foolish decision to go off and do stuff on my own. Brave because I had absolutely no experience of running a business and limited experience in my field. Foolish because I thought I knew it all. And so for the first couple of years, I basically tried to set up a business that I had no clue of, in terms of what the potential was. So that was a learning experience. I think I burnt my fingers. I learned how badly things can go. uh, I changed track from what my core business in HR was to actually doing what I love to do, which was adventure centric training and doing a lot of work with children, which was a great experience. Obviously, the money wasn't there in that field, but it was a great experience. It taught me a lot of things in terms of how to run my business. It also taught me how to make decisions, how to be quick in terms of being able to think of solutions, etc. So those were the first, if I sort of look at my first 7, 8 years of my life, from getting a really good job offer from campus. I joined TCS when I started working, spending a couple of years there, and then going off on my own and doing my own stuff and learning the hard way. Those were my first initial foundation years.
Okay, that's actually exciting. So
The first 10 years, go ahead.
no, I was so I just wanted to kind of capture that moment you talked about, that getting to the TCS and then going off on your own and then learning the hard way, as you said. It kind of reminds me, I come across a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly incubated at different incubation center. I'm on a panel with three or four of them. And then when I see that enthusiasm and the passion, but then I see lack of preparedness, it kind of reminds me my own venture as well, which also failed. And then I also did the same thing, 2 years with PwC, and then jumped into something of my own, which didn't work. But then it teaches it makes you humble. It teaches you where you can go wrong. And then the learning to think about every aspect of business at that point in time. Although there is a failure in terms of that venture didn't succeed, but then there's a learning about holistic thinking. How would you put all of this together for yourself in terms of uh, how did that help in the years to come?
So I think I learned a lot of things in those few years running my own company. I hadn't I was never thinking long term. I was only thinking about, how do I make sure that I earn enough for this month, and how do I make sure that I earn enough for the next month, without really thinking about planning business or planning decisions on a long term basis. I think that was fundamentally one of the biggest things I learned. And when I realized that I, you know, So I sort of got a client and I serviced the client and did a lot of work for the client. And then when that engagement was over, I suddenly realized that I didn't have any other business because I hadn't focused on building other clients. And so then the whole process would start from scratch, and I would have 2 or 3 or 4 lean months. So my ability to plan financially, my ability to plan long term, my ability to plan a business, sustainability within the business, etc. All of those things, as I went through the experience, I learned the hard way. Uh, your ability to make financial decisions on where you should invest, what you should invest in, all that came into being. Everything that I sort of bunked classes for in when I decided that I wanted to do HR, and therefore I would bunk my finance classes and my marketing classes sometimes. I regretted it because I realized that I needed to know my fundamentals in finance and my fundamentals in marketing. So I think all of that was a learning experience. Did I enjoy the experience? Absolutely yes. Do I have any regrets about doing that experience? Absolutely not. But would I have done it very differently and perhaps at a later stage of my career? Perhaps the answer is yes. It's always easy, or it appears very easy when you're sitting on an armchair and saying, "Hey, I can do this," or "I can do this business." But when you sort of get into the nitty gritties of running it, that's when you realize it's so different from what you were thinking about when you were sitting in an armchair and planning the business.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for actually underscoring that message, that the without getting into the water, preaching to the swimmer how they should swim is easier. But then when you are actually swimming on your own, then you realize the challenges. The one thing that I also just want to underscore for everybody, your emphasis on uh, how you actually appreciate that the fundamentals that you are taught or exposed to in schools during classes actually come handy, and they do matter in life as you become professional. I hope it's not frozen, because for me it's kind of freezing.
Yeah, it froze for a few seconds, but you're absolutely right, Dr. Khare. I much as I thought it was great fun to skip classes and bunk classes and ignore some of the stuff that was there, I think in hindsight, perhaps knowing some of that and attending some of those classes would have helped me greatly. You don't realize it at that stage how important some of the fundamentals are, but I think in the long term they play out. When I sort of interview people and speak to students wanting to join the bank or my function, uh, I always emphasize on how strong their fundamentals are. If you've got strong fundamentals, your ability to navigate an organization, navigate your work, navigate your job, are just made so much easier. When you're struggling with the fundamentals, I think you will generally struggle with being able to do anything beyond just pure tactical work.
I think this is kind of an important lesson here, a message for everybody, that we need to pay attention to our fundamentals and how they connect. Because if you are not doing that, then there's a struggle, and then of course it's kind of going to be difficult to go beyond tactical. Mr. Mathur, you were talking about, so this is the first few years, very interesting journey, right? I mean, most of the people who have reached where you have reached usually have the very clean and smooth first few years, where they talk about, say, kind of getting into the fast tracks of the career path, and then is getting ahead early on, which kind of builds the foundation and then gets them ahead. So uh, if I can call it, the second inning after the first foundation year, where you were more adventurous than how we usually see these management grads. How did that begin? And then how did that build you up for what was to come?
So the first inning ended up very rough. In 2002, I went belly up as far as the organization was concerned. And between my wife and I, we had about 3,000 rupees in our bank account after having worked for 10 years, a child on the way, and pretty much the company producing nothing. And that's when I decided that it was time to sort of step back into the corporate world. Uh, so, it sort of ended up on a rough note, and it began on what I call a negative balance sheet. But I think from there on, it was about making sure that you're making choices with your head and not your heart, making sure that you were making steady steps forward. And so over the last 18 odd years that I've been back in the corporate world, I think the progress has been slow and steady. I've been fortunate on a couple of things. I've been fortunate to have got breaks in good organizations. I've been fortunate enough to have good mentors and good bosses who've helped me guide my career. And I think both of those things have paid off. The one interesting thing that I do want to share with you is that I have never been, you know, or no recruiter or recruiting vendor or consultant has ever got me a job. All of my jobs or changes that I have made have been through references that my previous bosses have made, or someone who's worked with me has made. And I think that's an important thing to underscore, because your ability to network, your ability to build connections, your ability to make sure that you know people around in this universe is tantamount to your success. I mean, you cannot not have a good network and hope to succeed. And it's not just about getting yourself a job. It's about basically being able to navigate this big bad world of corporate life.
So this is
So the sort of other piece of advice.
yes,
Sorry,
please.
I was just saying that the other piece of advice that I always have for young students is that build your network, reach out, connect with people. That's going to be really important over the course of your life.
So this is an amazing story, I think. And then, as we spoke last time, so we have some parallels in life. I remember going belly up and with just 5,000 rupees after just I got married. You're talking about even a worse situation like 3,000 rupees married and then child on the way, which is tougher. Salute to you. This is an amazing story of resilience and self-confidence, because I think that's a time when people can compromise with their next choices. That's a time when people can lose confidence in themselves, but then you could put it back together, as they say, and then moved on. Uh, so the resilience is something that kind of stands out for me. Uh, there's another thing that you're talking about, which I find very interesting, and sometimes I see people get misled by what they hear. So just a clarification question here. You also wrote a book on good bosses, and you are underscoring the importance of having mentor in life and networks. So I've seen that when people think about the networks, and particularly in the societies where so-called vasta and connection works, that they believe that the network alone, just knowing people, would help. What role did it play? The credibility that you had within your network, and how did you establish it with your mentors? What role did it play to be able to exploit the network that you could?
So I think there are a couple of things that I want to sort of underscore as far as the network is concerned. Knowing people or being a LinkedIn connection or a Facebook connection or whatever other social media folks use is not what I'm talking about. Your network is built on a relationship, and a relationship has what I call a give and take piece. For example, the relationship with your boss is a function of you performing,
Mm.
right? And the manager or the boss recognizing your performance. That's what the network is. It's not about him knowing you that as someone who works in your team. It is about him or her knowing that you are someone that can be trusted, that can deliver work, and that's when individuals will refer you. I mean, look at your own sort of network. When someone comes to me and says, "Can you refer me to a job that you have uh, in my current organization?" I I I don't do it because I know you. I do it if I believe that you are going to be an asset to the organization. Because what I'm doing when I'm referring you to the organization is putting my credibility on the line by saying that, hey, take Dr. Khare. I trust him. I think he's a good performer, right? Now, if I didn't have that comfort with Dr. Khare, then and I referred you and it went wrong, then guess what? People will say, Rajat referred,
Yeah.
Dr. Khare. So your relationship or your network will be based on how you work and what you produce for individuals. So the basic threshold that you will have to cross are twofold. One is obviously a performance piece. The other is an attitude piece. And I sort of quote this example all the time. When you call someone on their mobile and they see your name flash on the phone, what do you think is the reaction that they have? Is it a, oh God, I don't want to speak to this guy, but I still have to speak to him because I know him? Or is it a, hey, this guy is calling, I want to pick up the phone and speak to him? If it's the former, then you're in trouble. If it's the latter, then clearly you're doing a good job. So I think that should be a threshold of that should be a threshold that you should be crossing when you talk about networks and relationships. It only opens a door at the bare minimum. After that, it's about you.
So I think this is a very clear message that it is network, but then it's actually based upon the your historical performance that the network has knowledge of, and then attitude and the credibility that you have within the network, so that you can actually be referred by a referee that has value of the reference that he or she provides.
And
Uh,
attitude, Dr. Khare, is something that again we sort of tend to not pay too much of attention on.
mm,
But you know, and I ask everyone who's on this call to sort of look around at your friends or close family. Actually, forget the close family. Just look at your friends because that's easier to do. Uh, you can pretty much put them in these boxes which talk about he or she is a positive person, or he or she is always negative or always whining, etc. And guess what? You want to spend time with the person who's generally more positive, who's generally more encouraging, who's generally more communicative, right? That's the same expectation that anyone else will have of you also. So don't sort of ignore the attitude piece. You may be a great performer, but if you are a whiner, guess what? I don't want you on my team.
mm. So I think we heard the story so far, and I'm just kind of helping here everybody else to, and myself too, to remember some of those lessons that we are learning here. It's about resilience, it's about competence, performance, and it's about attitude. So I think those are the things. So as you built your career in the middle management sort of now, preparing for the next thing that's to come, which is the leadership position, what are the lessons from the mid management that stands out for you that also prepared you for the top management jobs?
Uh, my wife, often says to me that I think I missed the what you're referring to as the middle management years. That she completely missed me in those years,
Mm,
and I don't know whether that was right or wrong, but I think I really had to slog because I was coming from a like I said a negative uh, delta or a negative balance sheet, and I had to prove myself in the corporate world from scratch. So I think I really slogged myself over the middle years. Maybe I shouldn't have done the crazy hours that I did. Maybe I shouldn't have sort of ignored family and just focused on work. Maybe I shouldn't have ignored some of my health and passions in those areas. But I'm saying that in hindsight. At that point of time, the need to sort of make sure that you are really want to achieve something and achieve something quickly was what was driving me. So, uh, in hindsight, tough years, a lot of hard work, again, fortunate to have been recognized for some of those efforts. Uh, but that was pretty much what the middle years were. When I now sort of advise people on their middle years, I tell them about working hard. I tell them about showing a positive attitude, but I also tell them a lot about focusing on family and focusing on their passions and interests and not letting that go because that later on will come back and bite you.
This is interesting because I would want to take this moment. I have several other people who talk to me today or who actually are on the call. Most of them actually said that, one thing that we would really want to know from Mr. Mathur is that he has done so many things, and then we find hard to do just one of that he has been able to do, a triathlon, marathon, and then everything else that talked about writing a book, contributing to another book. So how do you manage all of this now?
There are 24 hours. Use them. Uh, you know, honestly, I mean, 24 hours is a heck of a lot of time if you really want to use them. So I'll tell you about running. Right, running is a passion. I love to run. I love to do sports. Uh, and when my kids were growing up, my wife said to me, uh, you can do that because these take time. You can do this in the morning as long as you are back at home at 6 o'clock in the morning to wake up the kids and get them ready for school, or help me in getting the kids ready for school. So my options were, I either stop running, or I follow a schedule where I'm back home by 6 o'clock in the morning so that I can help with the kids getting up and getting ready for school. So I decided that I'll take that option, and I would, uh, when the kids were at that age where they needed help in terms of getting ready, I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I would do my running or my training between 4:30 and 6. Be back home at sharp 6. The point that I'm trying to make here is, if you're really committed to following a passion or an interest, then there is you can always find the time to do it. And I'm not alone in this. You look at people who follow the passions and interests while doing a full-fledged 8, 10, 12-hour job. It's your ability to find the time to do that. My favorite example is a lot of people. So I'm not a TV person. I don't watch TV, uh, but every now and then I get hooked onto some of these Netflix series, and I've made a deal to myself, saying I will only watch a Netflix series if I'm exercising, or either running on a treadmill, or on a stationary bike. And so I watched the episode for 45 minutes, but that means that I have to cycle or run for 45 minutes. And guess what? If I want to watch a second part of that series, I have to run or cycle 45 minutes more. That works for me. So I think so. You see, you can sort of combine stuff and think about things creatively. But I'm not a person who if anyone comes to me and says, "But I don't have time," I make them sit down in front of me and we work out why or what time wasters they have. And believe me, uh, you know between Instagram, Facebook, and I am active on social media, but between Instagram, Facebook, and Netflix, the quantum of time that people end up wasting is just phenomenal.
So what are the traits, what are the skills and knowledge sets that you kind of gained during middle management years in terms of management skills and knowledge, which prepared you for the top leadership position and then allowed you to make the transition?
So I don't know whether it is really a sort of significant delta transition. I think it sort of happens gradually. People recognize you for what you bring to the table, and you start to get more responsibility, and you evolve over a period of time. You know, there's a reason why when you graduate out of MBA school, no one makes you a CEO of their firm, right? It and the single reason why they don't do that is because they want you to gain the experience that you need to have under your belt to be able to make good decisions and think through some of the challenges and issues that you will face when you are the CEO of the firm or managing director of the firm, or whatever you have. Uh, and I think one of the things that every individual needs to recognize is that this is not a uh, finish an MBA and become CEO. This is a process, and this is a transition journey that you have to undertake. And you have to take some hard knocks in the middle, and you have to learn as you go forward. So back to your question about what was the transition that happened. It was just about reassessing and resharpening some of the skills that you learn, whether it was your ability to make decisions, your ability to look ahead and see what challenges you might have, your ability to relate and connect with people, and your ability to really plan and have a vision for the future. If I think you have these three or four fundamental traits, and you express them in your growing years, then someone will recognize you for those and give you positions that sort of correspond with what you are able to deliver. I've been at the helm of a function. I've run businesses, and each of them have been learning experiences as much as they have demanded a pound of flesh in terms of what I give back to the firm. So it's not a one way street. It is a two-way street. You're always learning. Every day that you do something new, every day that you do something different is a learning experience. That doesn't stop. But really, I think it's those four fundamental things that I spoke about, which are key to sort of having being a holistic leader, if I may call it that. And I don't
One of
know
the
if I'm that. If I honestly, I don't know I'm that. I try and do these things, uh, and some, sometimes you're successful and sometimes you're not.
it's like wonderful that you said that it's about the journey. It's not something that you are going to actually achieve its milestone and then a journey continues for the rest of your life. um, One thing that actually comes to my mind, and then that's from my experience into how I watch leaders. So I watch leaders, I coach leaders, and then I often find that what makes difference between a good leader or a successful leader and not so successful is the ability to build teams and then competent teams, delegate to the teams. So uh, in your experience, how did you develop those capabilities, and when did you realize that now you have that ability? What are those things that are required for you to become a leader, be able to build teams, nurture them, ensure that they are competent enough to deliver?
So I have a very simple formula, and it's based on your ability to trust and your ability to be trusted. If that ingredient is there, then teams will work well together. If that ingredient is missing, then you will always have challenges. You will always have a he says, she says incident. You will always have silos. You will always have horizontal and vertical splits. Uh, the the focus that I have is to make sure that I communicate and communicate openly with the teams, and my focus is to make sure that that is enabling a building of trust between me and my team members. I've been fortunate enough to have some really good team members. I've always prided myself by having managed their careers and they managing my expectations, and so that's worked well for me. If your team member trusts you, then they will do whatever it takes for you to become successful because they know that at the end of the day, their wagon is hitched onto your wagon. Um, so if you can focus on that, and if you can make sure that that happens, then I think you're uh, likely to be very successful. Now, it's not true that all your relationships will be successful, right? Or there'll be some relationships that may not work the way you may want them to work, either for your own fault or for someone else's fault. That's always a debate that'll happen. But as long as you are attempting to build the relationship on trust, you will have generally positive results. Uh, you know, teams. If you sort of don't work out of a fear that they will take your job, and you promote and propagate their careers, they will respond back, and they will respond back in ways that will project your career even quicker than you can imagine.
You have played a role as the head for the talent management for Deutsche Bank at Asia Pacific level for Morgan Stanley before you moved in as an MD for India operations. Um, when you look at the newcomer or somebody who comes for an interview, when you have to select a person, or when you have to select a person for nurturing that person as a talent for the next level, what are you looking for? What are the traits that you're looking for in people?
So two things that I said right up front: attitude and fundamentals.
Okay. So
Right?
attitude and fundamentals.
Yeah, it's very easy to judge and figure out a person in a 30-minute conversation. It doesn't take much to be able to do that. I said if you're going into an interview and you can convey a positive attitude, that's half the battle won. And if your fundamentals are strong, then the rest of the battle is won. So that's pretty much what I look for. Everything else is manageable.
So we're going to just let it flow, and then maybe for a few more minutes. In the interest of some question that I have actually received from the participants today, there are some questions I have kind of bucketed them into some different groups. So some of those questions, what I would call is kind of interesting questions. So one of them is, do we have a success mantra that you would want to share with people?
I'm very finicky about time, uh, and I have very little tolerance for people who don't respect my time. Uh, my big mantra is punctuality and this thing. You cannot say I'll be there in 5 minutes and then not show up in 5 minutes, or you cannot say I'll be done by 6 o'clock and you are not done by 6 o'clock. And if you can't, then you should come in before 6 o'clock and tell me why you can't be done. You can't come after 6 o'clock and tell me sorry, I missed the deadline. That's it's just a rant of mine, but I just this is my big mantra.
No, thank you so much. Uh, mm, this is wonderful. I think I was just wondering when you were talking about it, that somebody who accomplishes so much understands the power of the 24 hours, but then also understands the value of the time and commitment that you make to yourself and to others. Without that, it's going to be difficult to actually manage so many things so well.
So one of the interesting things that Sabrina, my assistant, does is that
Yeah.
for all of these calls, like the one that we had with you, the reason why I was 10 minutes early on this call and logged in was because of her. She knows my schedule and she makes sure that I have I have a trigger earlier than
Yeah.
the meeting. But that's my team sort of now works around that's the system of mine.
So the one was the other question that I have for you, it's about the HR, and I have actually three questions in HR area. Uh, one question is that if you would want to point out one single trait in HR person that all HR person should have if they really want to be successful in the domain, what would that be?
Positivity.
Positivity. I think
The,
that's
the,
a
the only reason why people will come and speak to you is if you're a positive person. If you are a if you are perceived as someone who's not a positive person, then people won't come and speak to you. And if people don't come and speak to you, then your career as an HR person is going to go sliding down. So you need to be positive. You need to be able to portray positivity, and it doesn't matter what you are outside, but your adapted style in office needs to be positive.
the other question I have is about the technology. They say that about AI is coming and then machine learnings and artificial, all that is happening. How much would HR get impacted by that?
So, is it going to get impacted? Absolutely, yes. I sort of look at when I started my career and what I used to do when I started my career. Uh, all that stuff that I used to do then is not being done by a human anymore. It's being done by a machine, right? Similarly, stuff that still exists in the commoditized operational space is going to move into machine, whether it's robotics or whether it's AIML, but some of that stuff is going to happen. What is not going to go away, at least in my lifetime, and perhaps for most of your lifetimes, is going to be anything that requires uh, cognitive people relationships. Uh, your ability to make decisions based on people, emotions, reactions is something that, at least right now, the machines can't take away. The function has evolved, right? If you are going to be coming in wanting to do administrative activities, tracking leave and running a performance management system, etc., all that is gone. What people require and what business heads require from you as an HR person is advice on how to make people decisions, and you need to equip yourself to be able to do that. Everything else between now and the next 10 years is going to go away to the machine.
I actually find it very interesting that your response to the question. I was wondering that with AI coming in, and then these tests such as Harrison assessment tests and other kinds of the personality tests that we have, and their ability, their predictability kind of can improve because you can design questions, you can have correlates that would find it, the people find it very difficult to kind of fool the system. And then any supercomputer or any computer with a greater power would have far better understanding of kind of deducing out of that the real personality that even people might find that they don't know about themselves. But then what you said, that your ability to understand the emotional aspect of the relationship and they take decision based on that, that's what would actually still keep the HR people in the job. That's kind of an amazing component. It's like a slice of that piece, but then I think it's an important slice of that piece.
And it's interesting you say that, because I think AI specialists or AI ML specialists within HR are now having a big role to play. So I sort of in trying to keep up with this, decided to do a second postgraduate diploma program in business analytics, and I was fascinated, by what the power is, and specifically around data analytics. It's just amazing what you can produce and look at in terms of data. And I'll give an example so that you can sort of relate to that. And this is a public example that's available. So if you actually search for a data set that exists for IBM on Kaggle or one of these places, you will find that they did an analysis on attrition. And typically, when organizations run attrition analysis, they look at personal reasons or compensation, etc., are the fundamental reasons for people exiting. But they ran this analysis and they found that one of the biggest sort of triggers for exits was actually the distance between the office and home. And people who stayed more than 7 kilometers away from the office in that data set actually were more or likely to attract more than those that stayed less than 7 kilometers away. And if you actually look at the data set, it's got about 3,000, 4,000 odd records. If you look at the data and you were to look at it as a human being, you wouldn't be able to drive that correlation. But when you started to look at run a Python script or an R script on this one and be able to do that, you realized what the power is. That, if you develop that as a skill set along with your MBA program, I think is phenomenal to have.
Yeah, so, and how the Morgan Stanley is responding to the pandemic in India?
So, like most organizations, we quickly moved in March from work in office to 100% work from home. We continue to operate 100% work from home. We have, over the last 9 months or 8.5 months, transitioned all our processes to be able to support virtual activities. So, recruiting, for example, all the hires that we've done in the last 9 months have been done virtually. The onboarding experience has been virtual. Our businesses are functioning virtually. We're doing client calls virtually. We're doing client deals virtually. You've been reading about a couple of the deals that we've done for Reliance. They've all been done virtually. So I think what we've done and managed really well is to make sure that we've moved every process that was run in the office into a virtual environment. Sorry. Now, we've been fortunate because we have a worker base which is educated, which has the infrastructure. Not all of the organizations, specifically the manufacturing setups, would have been able to do that. But for us, our ability to sort of transition into a complete work from home environment has just been fantastic. We haven't gone back to work as yet, and we're still sort of looking at employee health and safety first before we take any decision on going back. The broader issue in terms of the sort of challenges that work from home throws at us are still things that we and every other organization is battling with, whether it's bandwidth, whether it is the stress of individuals not having a social infrastructure around them, whether it's the sort of splitting of time between household duties and work. All of those we are cognizant of, and we try and enable as much flex as possible with employees. but those are real challenges that we will continue to address and work with.
The other two questions and the quick questions here. So one is, what's the Morgan Stanley's point of view on Bitcoin?
So, Dr. Khare, I'm going to refrain from commenting on the markets or any of that. I think that's it's a firm protocol
Policy.
that
Yep.
we don't comment or offer opinions on anything that's market related. But if you want to hear anything please feel free to go to our research report sections. There's plenty of stuff on anything that you want to hear, and you will get Morgan Stanley's view on a lot of things beyond the question that you just asked.
So I think I'm actually back on the HR questions, and then this particular question I actually kept for the end. So somebody actually did the research and then talked about the Raghuram Rajan's comment after 2008 crisis. And then in a book, he actually writes that the 2008 crisis was fundamentally poised to emerge because of the way incentives were determined in the financial sector market. And then that led to the distortions of behavior. What has Morgan Stanley done to fix that?
So again, you will hear this and see this that we are probably one of the few firms that have come out very strong after the 2008 crisis. We're probably one of the firms that hasn't been tainted by anything between then and now. We've kept our noses clean on this. I think we've sort of altered the structure of our business. So we bought Smith Barney, and we sort of diversified into having a large wealth management platform, which gave us regular revenue. We put a lot of conditions in the way we do business. Code of conduct, ethics, etc., are principal to what we do, and we've always sort of been on the forefront of making sure that we put practices and policies in place that help us govern better. I think the industry in general has also done that. Will you still end up having a few bad apples every now and then in the industry at large? The answer is yes. But in general, I think the industry has responded very positively to making sure that they build in regulation systems and practices to be able to handle, to be able to nullify any attempt at sort of short circuiting systems.
Thank you so much. I'm sure that the question, your answer, your response addresses the query here. This has been a wonderful. I just couldn't recognize that we have been talking for about an hour and 10 minutes now, close to that. And as I'm reflecting back on our conversation, adaptability, resilience, openness, hard work, network, performance, attitude, the time, and then the commitment to time, and then respect for time. I think there are a lot of lessons that we have here for each one of us. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I personally have benefited. I'm sure that everybody here on this call today experiences it. Luckily, technology allows us to do the asynchronous benefit as well to other people. We have recorded this conversation, and this conversation would be available on YouTube for all those people who had expressed their interest in joining us today and couldn't join for whatever commitment they have had and the technological challenges. I think except for those periodical freezing or unfreezing, I'm still thankful that it actually unfroze as well. Thank you so much, Mr. Mathur, and then we would look forward to having you here again.
Again, I think you froze, but thank you so much for hosting me. Like I said, look, everyone will have their own unique journeys. Everyone will have their own learning experiences. I always tell people it takes a lot of effort to be unsuccessful. The quantum of the success will be defined by what you want and how you want it. But it's within reach for a lot of people. Three things that I always tell people. Make sure that you have mental resilience. Make sure you have physical resilience, i.e., look after your health and well-being, and make sure that you build your financial resilience. If you take care of these three things, there is no reason why you can't be successful. All the best to everyone who was on this call, and I hope to be able to interact with you in person, perhaps in the future. Thank you so much for hosting.
Yeah, I look forward to that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody, enjoy your evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much from the Jagran Lake City University Knowledge Series. This was the first season, first session. It was well worth it. Thank you so much, Mr. Rajat Mathur, for inaugurating it with us. Thanks a lot.